curiosity. Lovely. So to give a little context, today we have a longer session and we're going to break it up into two topics. There'll be the first topic and then the second topic. The first topic is going to be on the factors of awakening, and the afternoon session, the second topic, will be on the Four Noble Truths. And I've given Tia a number of tables to share with you, some at the end and some during. But what I'd like to do now for the next 20 minutes or so is support you in a guided meditation. And we're going to start with diaphragmatic breathing. So with diaphragmatic breathing, you can either do this sitting or lying down. So take whatever posture allows you to feel more sense of ease, comfort. And if it's available to you, to put one hand on your chest and one hand below your rib cage, your belly. And then breathe in slowly through your nose, feeling the air move into your abdomen and your lower hand moving. And so you want to notice your belly will expand and your lower hand will move. But we want to see if you can keep your upper hand, your upper chest, relatively still, so that your lower belly is filling with air and your chest is not so much. And now purse your lips and exhale slowly on the out breath. In breath through the nose, filling the lower belly, and make a sh sound through your lips. Sh. And do this a couple more times. Filling up your lower belly and exhaling, making a sound through your lips. And if your exhale is longer than your inhale, you may notice that your system starts to calm and settle, which is the aim, what we're hoping for. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Do this a couple more times in your own rhythm. And now, if it feels more comfortable to allow your hands to shift and come into your lap or to another place, allow them to do that. Just notice what your body feels like now. Notice the shape you're in, the posture you're in. Notice the touch points with the seat and the floor. Notice body to body contact. Notice skin to skin contact. And when you release the diaphragmatic breathing, notice what the breath feels like now. Notice if you can differentiate between the in-breath and the out-breath, between the cool air coming in and the warm, moist air going out. Notice how the breath feels. Coming in and how the breath feels going out. If you feel a little bit more energy as you breathe in, if you feel a little bit more relaxation as you breathe out. And if those are not what you feel, notice what you do feel. Just gently bringing your attention to your breath without wanting to control it or change it. Just be open and curious to how's the breath now? And how is it impacting my body now? And where do I feel it most prominently now? Open, gentle, curious. And it's really common for our attention to jump onto different things. And when we notice that, all we need to do is just notice and then reconnect with the breath. So the breath is a place that we can focus our attention. And sometimes it's helpful to help us feel a little bit more collected and centered. And we can learn how to focus on the breath to help support feeling a little bit more calm or grounded. And the breath is part of the first foundation of mindfulness, contemplation of the body. Just as knowing what our posture is, just as bringing awareness and attention into our daily life. And the second foundation of mindfulness is the mindfulness of Vedana, or feeling tones. So you can look in your body and notice which of the feeling tones you're experiencing that are pleasant. Is it the fullness of the in-breath or the release of the out-breath? I just had something to eat not long ago, so there's a feeling of fullness. The temperature feels just right. Whatever feels pleasant to you, just notice the different sensations and notice the quality of pleasant connected to them. It also may be that you have some experiences that are unpleasant, some physical experiences that are unpleasant, some tightness or some tension or some pain. Just notice that quality of unpleasant. And when we're with unpleasant, it's helpful to move our attention back and forth. So we don't want to grab onto it like a pliers, like a vice grip. Just want to move back and forth from what's unpleasant and then gently return to what's pleasant. So we touch the unpleasant and return to the pleasant. So we don't get tired. It gives us more resilience and more capacity. And as we have more capacity and more resilience, we can stay a little bit longer with what's unpleasant and notice if our attention allows it to open or shift or change. Not expecting it to, just noticing if it happens to. And then returning to what's pleasant. And then with neutral sensation, we can notice things like the wetness in our mouth or the wetness in our eyes or the cloth touching the skin or the temperature in the air. Or all kinds of sensations that usually we don't notice just because they're neutral. So it's often the case that because they're not intense, we don't see them. We miss it. Just check out what's neutral. What's neutral in your breath? What's neutral in your body? And now coming back to pleasant sensation, pleasant feeling tone, just notice if there's any subtle wanting more of it. Just allow that feeling of wanting in your mind. There's nothing you need to do with it. You don't have to make it go away. Just be curious about that quality of wanting. If you notice it. Now shifting to an unpleasant feeling and checking and see what the reaction to the unpleasant feeling. Is it neutral? Do you want it to go away? Are you distracting? Hard to stay with it. So in a very loving and non-judgmental way, just check and see if you notice any tendency with unpleasant feeling. And allow that quality, that reaction, to be what you allow your attention to rest on briefly. And now allow your attention to come to something that's neutral and see what's the tendency. Are you interested? Are you curious? Are you bored? Is it hard to focus? Is it easy to get distracted? So without any judgment that it should be different, just see what it feels like to be with neutral and what kind of reaction is the tendency, your tendency, faced with something that's neither exciting or painful or pleasurable. Now come back to the breath and feel the fullness of the in-breath and the release of the out-breath. Now allowing whatever mood or emotion or thought, being aware of it without needing to judge it, make it go away, make it stay. Just see if it's possible to notice feelings, thoughts, moods, and bring awareness to them. Is it possible just to make a space for whatever is here to be here? Without needing to judge or to react or to change or to be any way different. Just to be open to what's here. And then to notice, is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? To notice where in your body can you feel it or experience it, or where is there an impact in your body? And so in this way, in these last few minutes of the meditation, allow yourself to stay with the breath as an anchor. And when moods or thoughts or emotions come up, allow yourself to notice what they are, be with them. Allow them to be there without needing them to go away or to stay or to do anything. Just notice what's happening without any kind of an opinion or judgment about it. I'm going to ring the bell and just stay with the sound of the bell until you can't hear it any longer. And I invite you to take a couple of minutes and stretch. We'll come back here and I'll share some reflections on this first topic, the 7 factors of awakening. Hmm. And when you come back in, if you can turn your video on so I can see your back, that will help me. Hi. Hmm. Lovely. Thank you. So I want to begin with a brief review of the first and second, the first foundations of mindfulness that we've already covered. which is just a little bit of just talking about what we were just doing in our meditation practice. So the first foundation of mindfulness is working with the body. And that includes our posture, knowing if we're seated, if we're standing, if we're walking, if we're lying down. It includes the various kinds of things that we do in our daily life. Getting things, putting clothes on, washing, eating. It includes having more sense of what our body is made of, both in terms of what actually makes a body and in terms of the elements of the body. And it includes breath meditation. And then there's contemplations that we haven't gone into in this class around watching what happens to the body in different states of decay. And it's not meant to gross us out. It's meant to help us become clear about what is a body, what is it that we can expect. And as we get more kind of like grounded in reality around these topics, it helps us live more free, more easy, more clear about what's important. So the first foundation is around the body, and the body is helpful because it doesn't get lost in the past or the future. It's just with what's happening now. And that can be really helpful when things are confusing and complicated. The second foundation is Vedana, or the feeling tones. And that is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And what's great about that is no matter how incredibly complicated our world is, everything can be distilled into it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So the enormous complexity of the world that we're living in right now can be sorted into 3 baskets. And that can also help us feel less overwhelmed. I don't like it. I like it a lot. I'm not interested because it's not pleasant or unpleasant. I can't get any sense of myself with it, so I don't want to pay attention to it. So when we start to look a little bit more at the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, then we start also seeing our reactions to them. It's not always the case, but sometimes when we like something, we want it more of it. We want it to stay. We want it to last. When we don't like something, we want it to go away. We want to kill it. We want it to disappear. And when it's neutral, we get distracted or we space out or we want something that's pleasant. We want to go eat a chocolate chip cookie because that has some impact. And impact is something that makes us feel we can locate ourselves. And that gives us some interest. So as we start to get more curious about the reactions that we have to things, then we can start noticing the patterns, liking, not liking, spacing out. And this is part of the third foundation of mindfulness, which is just to be aware of the contents of our mind. And as I mentioned in the last class, one of the things that's really liberating about the third foundation of mindfulness is that it doesn't make any judgment about what it is that we're experiencing. So if we're filled with lust, know that we're filled with lust. If we're filled with anger, know that we're filled with anger. When our mind starts moving into quieter spaces or more concentrated spaces, or we know them. So it doesn't make a judgment that we should get rid of lust and anger and we should have quiet and stillness. It's not saying that. It's saying just be with what is. And so the third foundation of mindfulness is a ticket to liberation because it gives us permission to feel what we're feeling without having to have an opinion and a judgment about it or about ourselves because we're feeling it. That's awesome. But the third foundation of mindfulness is not the end of the story. It's part of it, but it's not the end of the story. It's not the whole story. So we want to choose how we relate to what is happening in ways that optimize our well-being and our capacity to continue to make wise choices. So the fourth foundation of mindfulness is referred to the mindfulness of dhammas, mindfulness of phenomena or mindfulness of mental objects. And this is like the different kinds of categories that make up what we experience. And they include hindrances, aggregates, sense spheres, factors of awakening, and the Four Noble Truths. So in the last class, we saw the appearance of the hindrances in our desire for pleasant feeling and our aversion towards unpleasant feeling and our spacing out or getting distracted with neutral feeling. And we also saw them in the classical trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So in the fight experience where we're filled with rage or anger or we're just exploding, that's aversion. In the flight, that's fear. In the freeze, there's a delusion underneath the process of disconnecting. And in the fawn response, there's a desire for safety. The desire itself isn't problematic, but what we're trying to do is purchase safety by appeasing to others. And often this is not done with discernment, it's done as a habit. And when we are acting on sexual desire as a way of not feeling what we're experiencing, that also can be problematic. So when we are in any of these trauma responses, one of the things that we need to remember is that a trauma response by definition means that we're out of our window of tolerance, which means that we're out of the zone where we can effectively cope with what's happening. When we're out of our window of tolerance, our number one priority has got to be to come back into our window of tolerance where we can cope with what we are feeling, because it's there where we have choices about how we respond. So the first thing that goes offline is our ability to discern and observe without reacting. And the first thing that we can notice comes back online is our ability to make choices about where we focus our attention and to develop certain things that help. So one of the things that helps is to notice the factors of awakening and to increase some of the factors. So the hindrances obstruct concentration, insight, and awakening. And the 7 factors of awakening encourage, support concentration, insight, and awakening. So what are the 7? Mindfulness, investigation of Dhamma or curiosity, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So mindfulness, the first one, is the ability to pay attention to physical or mental events that take place in the present moment. It's a conscious attention to what is present. Bhikkhu Bodhi was the author of the first definition, and Venerable Analayo is the second author. And so one of the things that we can see is that we can notice the presence or notice the absence of these 7 factors of enlightenment. We don't need to bring the 7 factors of awakening and turn them into their own object of mindfulness. what we can do is cultivate them alongside whatever object we're practicing with. So, kind of like in review, the factors of awakening, mindfulness is the ability to maintain awareness of what's happening. Investigation is the curiosity or the capacity to look from different perspectives at what is happening. Energy, determination, or effort to do something, to start it, to stay with it, to follow through with it. Joy or rapture is the pleasure we feel in our body or in our breath or in our mind from doing something. Body joy is the tingle of pleasure we feel. Rapture or bliss is the mental joy or uplift we feel. Relaxation or tranquility is the ease that we feel. The degree to which our body is relaxed, the mind is at ease. Concentration is a calm, a one-pointed, a collectedness. And equanimity is the ability to accept things as it is without craving or aversion. So this whole pile is something that we can bring to whatever it is that we're experiencing. And the 7 factors of awakening have a name that's very lofty, but in reality, they are everyday qualities that we can experience in our daily life. So if you look at like what it's like to bring the 7 factors of awakening with like preparing a meal, something that we do often. You know, let's take a meal that I made the other day of rice and dal. You know, I was cutting Brussels sprouts and beets and celery root and collard greens. And so I needed to keep attention on the food and not get distracted by the text messages that were pinging or the drill of the machine next door. And so even though there was a lot of sense impact, I was keeping focused on the food preparation and what it was that I was cooking. That's mindfulness. And then interest. Interest is the ability, or curiosity is the ability to look at things from different perspectives and look at things with a bigger picture. And so I needed to figure out how hot the stove needed to be, when to stir the pot, if I put enough salt in, if there was enough water, if there was enough spices for each of the 3 dishes. So the energy is the effort. It's the effort to chop, to stir, to focus. And energy and investigation combine when we're experimenting with new combinations, which is like, I love to do that. I love to cook without any recipes. And so I'm just putting things in and tasting and getting a sense of the texture and how it looks and how it tastes. And so there's curiosity and tasting and sensing and assessing and then intuiting. So joy is the uplift or the well-being we can feel when we see it starting to come out and that it's beautiful, and the beet when it's cut is bright and how yummy it tastes, or the success of like you've got 3 different dishes and they all come out at the same time, hot, ready, and tasting good. Like it's a kind of a little miracle, but it's something we can celebrate and we can allow the joy to fill us. And tranquility is a relaxed state. It's the feeling of our body and mind at ease. It's a letting the food prep ground and relax us. It's pausing when we chew. It's tasting. And concentration is the ability to focus. So I had to figure out when to put on the rice, how long to cook the dal, that the Brussels sprouts needed longest to steam, and then the celery, and then the beets. And last was the collard greens. So there's a sense of like focusing and getting things in perspective. And so equanimity is even-mindedness. So even-mindedness, if it doesn't come out right, even-mindedness when it is delicious and that we don't actually keep eating and eating and eating because it tastes so good. So mindfulness is the quality that allows us to determine the presence or the absence of the other qualities. It's the central one. It's the one that balances and holds the others together. And so what we can start to do is start to notice the presence or the absence of these factors. And we don't need to limit it to when we're cooking. We can see when we're washing dishes or when we're shopping or when we're taking a shower. How much joy is present when we're taking a shower? And so as we accentuate joy, as we begin to learn how to look for calm or moments where we're feeling a little bit of relaxation, as we can notice when they aren't present, then that gives us more discernment about where we can focus to bring them back online. So many of us these days are experiencing restlessness and anxiety. And there's all kinds of reasons why we are experiencing that. And so sometimes, what we might be able to do is just to extend our out breath for a few moments, just like we did at the beginning of this meditation. Or just make the determination to eat, the first 5 spoonfuls of the meal a little bit slower. So we might not have 20 minutes, to meditate, but we might have 3 breaths that we can meditate, or 3 spoonfuls that we can slow down and just use the slowing down of eating 3 spoonfuls as a way to help us settle a little bit more. And, cooking, sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go well. And sometimes we burn things and it doesn't taste good, or we overcook things. And then the curiosity is, instead of like getting mad at ourselves or feeling bad, is there a way to reframe it so that there still can be some sense of ease? Maybe having something overcooked is still better than not having anything to eat. Or whatever is a frame that helps, look at something that didn't go well in terms of making it an easier thing to manage. So we can learn to pay attention to these factors as a way of increasing them, to noticing when they're absent, to developing when they're missing. And so when we're walking around and we're feeling restless and anxious and agitated, what's missing is calm and equanimity. What can we do that can help support us feeling a little bit more centered, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more rooted? So with the dysregulation many of us have been experiencing, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. And when we consider that, one of the stated objectives of our current administration is to do this, we can use mindfulness when we are dysregulated to shift focus, which is an effort, to help us come back into our window of tolerance. If we're feeling anxious, we might work with the out breath, or placing our hand on our heart and just feeling the weight and the pressure. I love to be in nature and spend time with trees, or go to dog parks and talk to the dogs and put my hands in their fur and give them cuddles, or go dancing. And some of these things, it doesn't take a lot of time, and I can move from feeling anxious to feeling settled very quickly. And so when we're feeling more settled, then we can take time to notice simple things that bring us joy. A good meal, colors of a sunset, a hummingbird, the success stories that we see, or the acts of kindness that we observe. And so one of the things that I'd like Tia to do, if you're willing, is to share your screen with the Factors of Awakening chart. I have some kind of a weird thing with my Zoom, which I haven't figured out. And so can you make that bigger? Can you increase that size?
Okay. I'm working on it. As soon as there's the button.
Okay. So
is that enough, or do you want more?
No, that's good. If you go on the left enlightenment factor, it shows all of the different 7 factors with their English and their Pali name. And then the next column is the description in the suttas of what it is. And then the following column, principal condition. And then other conditions. This is the commentary. So if we look at the other conditions for a moment and just scan through it, one of the things that is very interesting to notice is that the single one condition that is common for all of the 7 factors of awakening is that it is helpful to associate with mindful people, with wise people, with diligent people, with good people, with calm people, with concentrated people, with equanimous people. That associating with wise friends is the one universal component of all the 7 factors of awakening. And so just take note of that the people that we spend time with have an impact on us. And it can be a positive impact or a not positive impact. But when we have wise spiritual friends, that is one of the things that we can reliably count on to help support us with developing all 7 factors of awakening. So I want to pause here and ask Tia to stop the screen sharing. And we can come back to everybody present. And I invite your comments, your impact, your questions. What questions do you have? Yeah, if you're trying to talk to me, you're muted and I can't hear you.
Well, I don't. Okay. Hi, this is Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, nice to see you again. And thank you for doing this online class. And when I sit and am still, if I like the quiet, I can't tell if, and I'm feeling a quiet and a serenity. Do I want to just stay with that, or could that be a neutral place where I'm not, looking enough? Do I have to go out and look for pain in my body or look for thoughts? Because if I sit really still, how do I know when I'm sitting and the silence is there because I am fully present versus I'm I'm not looking enough?
So it's a very important question, and thank you for bringing that up. When there is genuine stillness, you can notice that there's a quality of fullness, and there's a sense of presence, and that there's a sense of being able to notice what's happening. So when the stillness is there, it's yummy, it's delicious, and it's very, very nourishing to just settle into the stillness. And so there's no need to go looking for anything. The difference is that when the stillness is not real stillness, but it's a kind of like numbness, then you'll notice with numbness that there isn't much ability to notice what's happening, that there isn't a sense of fullness. There's often a sense of absence or a lack of sensation or a lack of being able to sense your body experience or your moods or your minds or your thoughts. And if that's the case, then it is important to do what you can to come out of that, because that's not a helpful place to hang out. So discernment is needed, but all stillness is not something that you need to worry about. And so what's necessary is to get a sense of when the stillness is conducive and furthering, and if it might be actually something else.
That helps fully. Thank you.
Good. Are there other questions? Yes, Tia.
I want to apologize for going on and being on mute. That was me on mute. Sorry. I was like, other people on mute? What are we saying? Maddie, I will work out getting you the 3 attachments. I realize that you probably can't download them right now. And then y'all doing awesome. Keep on.
No, Tia, I actually copied them out of the chat and I pasted them into a text box and texted myself. So I think I solved it.
Perfect.
Okay. Cool. So sorry to have to leave. I'll catch the rest on Zoom.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay, if nobody else is going to. Anybody else? No? All right. Let's talk about, if it's okay to bring this up right now, pain, like overwhelming physical pain in the body. And so when I sit and desire to be with the pain fully, would you describe, I could describe what I do, but I'm interested in hearing what you do.
So when you're dealing with intense pain, it takes a lot of skill. And part of the reason why it takes a lot of skill is that even when you are experienced at being with pain, it's exhausting. And so it's really important with pain, particularly overwhelming pain, to titrate. And titrate is a chemistry term, and it's used when you are trying to take an acid and make it basic, or make a base and make it neutral, that you put in just a drop, drop, drop until it shifts from one to the other. And so when you're titrating with pain, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can titrate it by moving through the area of pain from one end to the other end. You can move by coming close to the edge of it and moving away again. You can so that there's a sense of feeling it from different angles and layers. And so then when there's a lot of stillness and a lot of equanimity, sometimes, not always, sometimes it's possible to go gently into the pain and just notice what happens when you bring attention there. And then come out, deliberately come out, and then stay with something that's more nourishing. Sometimes with pain, it can be interesting to notice that underneath the physical pain can be moods or emotions or memories. And that when you open up to those moods, emotions, and memories, something shifts with the pain. I want to say one thing more, which is that this kind of exploration with pain is okay in many different places, but in some areas it's not okay. Like, for example, in knees. Like if you're sitting with pain in your knees, pain in your knees can damage your knees. And so one has to be discerning about pain that is skillful to sit with and pain that is not skillful to sit with. I have known many people in monasteries that blew their knees out because they didn't make that discernment. And they thought any kind of pain is important to sit with. And they didn't understand that there's some kind of pain that is actually damaging to sit with. So we need to understand things like knees are delicate and that it's not helpful to sit with damaging pain, pain that is a signal that there's something that is being damaged. In that context, it's important to move your posture. But with many other parts of our body that are able to experience pain, it's not often the case that sitting with it can cause that kind of physical damage. So I want to shift from me talking and invite you to share. How do you work with it?
Me personally?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I get centered with myself and quiet with myself and somewhat concentrated with being willing to feel fully. And then I go to where the pain is and I allow myself to feel fully. However, I'm also bringing a different part of myself. After I felt myself embodied and centered, then I go to the pain and I allow myself to expand. And the expansion is outside of my body. It's outside of my physical body, the skin of my body. And I allow my body, myself, my awareness to reside with this bigger body and the physical pain inside of my body. And when I do that, I feel often a little bit of greater ease and ability to relax with my whole sense of self being a much larger sense of self. And it's almost like the pain becomes a smaller part of my awareness, and my awareness can get to be so big that if I keep working with it, maybe I can make that pain smaller and smaller and smaller, depending upon the moment, the time, the concentration, and how I'm doing.
So there's I mean, that sounds from my experience, when you do that, what happens to your sense of self and what happens to the pain?
My sense of self needs to stay, and this has taken years and years, with my body so that it's simultaneously with my breath. It's mostly my breath. By being with my breath, I can, when I'm doing this the way I want to be doing it, I'm with my breath and with the expanded sense of self. And my breath is what, in my case, helps me feel my oneness with myself while I'm sort of moving outward. So it's sort of like they're both going on at the same time. And when I was super, super ill, I'd just go and get lost without the connection to myself. That was great that was all I knew how to do at the time. And that really helped me survive for something that was difficult. But now I feel like this is even better because I hope I'm growing my awareness and I'm making myself sort of a larger self.
So it sounds to me like what you're doing is giving you considerably more capacity to be with the pain, and it's doing it in a way where your sense of yourself expands, and there's a sense, it feels, let me check if it's right, that when you expand your sense of self, there's a sense of being connected with something that's bigger.
Well, I'm always feeling a bit of feeling connected to something that's bigger. So it's just making that bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it does feel good. And it does feel stabilizing, and it does feel healing. And so if I go back to your answer to the first question, I think I feel fuller and even just better, bigger, fuller, happier in some ways, but not happy, blissful, because it's sort of like it's not really fun to be with that amount of pain, but I still feel like good to hold it. And I'm not holding it because I'm letting it go into the field. And that's the important thing. You see, you get that? It goes, the pain somewhat goes into a bigger field. I think that's safe.
Yeah. So the only thing that I would be curious about is that when you shift your attention to that sense of that bigger self, what happens when you relax into that sense of that larger field of conscious awareness that is holding the pain? And so when you move your attention back and forth between the awareness that holds the pain and awareness that knows the awareness.
What happens when I do that?
Yeah.
What happens when I move between the awareness that holds the pain and the awareness that is holding that larger awareness is there's a desire to stay in the larger awareness altogether.
And so when that desire allows you to relax into something that doesn't have pain, is there a problem with that?
No, I just think I better keep breathing. And you know that my breathing sometimes, if I let myself go too much, then I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay.
And I don't know that I'm breathing per se because I've sort of lost the connection. I'm told it's not good to lose the connection with the breathing, but I like it because it's very peaceful. But I'm not trying to leave my body and separate from my body. It starts by using this as a pretty good technique to manage pain.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm open to any and all observations of doing this with more awareness.
So there's different levels of relaxing attention and awareness that you might not be able to track the breath in the same way that aren't dangerous.
Okay.
And so I think I would need more time with you and more information before I could give more instruction. But it sounds to me like what you've found and what you've developed is something that's incredibly skillful to help you in many different ways. One of the ways is to manage overwhelming pain, but the other is to experience yourself as a much more expanded being that has much more. When you are that expanded, it puts into context the other things that you're experiencing.
Yes. And it makes it so that I feel very, very, very still
Mm-hmm.
and like not moving at all and like not changing it or coming out of it. It's like a good place to just stay.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I'm supposed to do meditation on and off, but when we get to places where we just stay and like to stay, and we have the time to stay there, isn't it healing to be there if we have a lot of healing that needs to happen in our bodies?
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, maybe this is a good pause point, and then I'd like to do is to invite everyone to take a 20-minute break and to have drinks or snacks or use the restroom or look out the windows or go for a walk or whatever it is that you can. And we'll be back here at 2:30.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I'd like to do, if you're amenable, is I'd like to start with a talk, then do questions, and end with a guided meditation on the Four Noble Truths. Is that amenable? Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. So before I go into the Four Noble Truths, I want to look a little bit into the reason why they're called noble. The teachings are gradual. And so the premise of the teachings is that you start exactly where you are and you take a single step. And wherever you begin, that's exactly the right place to begin. So with gradual exposure to teachings, with time and practice, there's the possibility to discover that when you bring mindfulness to your body, to your feelings, to the things that you experience in your mind, as you understand the hindrances and the factors of awakening, you have more choice. And as you have more choice, you have more ability to find anchors that stabilize your attention. You discover refuge. A refuge is something that is available from the flow of desire, aversion, distraction, and overwhelm. And in the gradual path, sometimes it's possible to see qualities taking root, greater capacity, greater ability to see clearly, greater ability to be responsive compassionately to yourself and to others, to make skillful choices. And so my guess is that no matter how sincere your intention is, the common experience is the flow back and forth between habit and tendencies that no longer serve, and spiritual insights and capacities that are soothing and comforting and offering relief and perspective. But at some point in practice, it's possible to take a single next step, and it's a leap. And in that leap, you don't come back. You cross over and you don't come back. And in that crossing over and not coming back, there's various different elements of our experience that's ordinary that we shift out of. And these particular things come about in the bondage, the shift from moving from bondage to liberation. And this movement from bondage to liberation is the journey to nobility. So the reason why the Four Noble Truths are called noble truths is that they are designed to lead to these different kinds of joy, peace, absence of suffering, and inability to cause harm. They're all noble ways of being, and that they're designed to lead to taking these steps that are leaps where we can't come back. And those steps that are leaps where we can't come back are different levels of freedom that we can experience. So we start with the Four Noble Truths as ideas that the Buddha taught. We can study them, learn about them. As we use them as a meditation practice, that's where we start having these shifts where these life-changing insights take place. So the Four Noble Truths is the truth that there is suffering, the truth that there is a cause of suffering, the truth that there's the cessation of suffering, and the truth that there's a path that supports us to lead to the cessation of suffering. Dukkha refers to the suffering of pain, sickness, aging, and death. It's the displeasure of not having what we want. It's the displeasure of not being able to get rid of what we don't like. It's the It's the anguish of being separated from what we love. Dukkha is usually translated as suffering, but that's really an inadequate translation. It's inadequate because suffering has a connotation of something that's really intense. And sometimes the dukkha is much more subtle than that. So, for example, the Buddha described neutral and pleasant feeling as dukkha. And he described them as dukkha because they don't last. And because they don't last, they're inherently satisfactory. So unsatisfactory describes the nuance of dukkha better than the word suffering. So when we go into the first noble truth that there is dukkha, this is the kind of dukkha of the reality of having a body, that there's some experience of pain and compression with gestation and with birth. And in addition to the love and to the joy that it brings, there can be discomfort or pressure or pain or having to pee a lot or difficulty to do things or pick up clothes or pick things up from the floor. You know, as the baby is coming through the canal, there's a burning. And as infants, we're entirely dependent on all of our basic needs being met from others. So we're highly sensitive to our need for holding and protection and attunement. And if we get it, we can feel the power of love and support. But even as we get it, there still is the basic vulnerability of learning how to be in a body that is subject to the elements. And when we don't have our basic needs met, it causes stress. And that stress then takes shape in different ways. And one of the ways that it takes shape is that it compensates for not having our needs met. Can any of us remember what it was like being an adolescent? Can we remember like the intensity of our bodies changing and trying to figure out what was going on and the hormones, and as our sexual characteristics were emerging, you know, how many of us would want to go back and be 14 or 15 or 16 again? You know, that was an intense time of change. For me, it wasn't an easy time. And then for many of us, middle age and getting older, and our body changes shape and everything starts moving towards the floor. We get wrinkles and our body hair changes, and we lose physical capacity and mental strength. We lose speed. We lose dexterity. And basic body functions like flatulence or urine are not so predictable. And so in addition to pain and dysfunction, the body ordinarily just loses capacity. And then death. It's the end of life. And there's none of us that's immune from it. And this is where the elements start to change and dissolve. And so while all of this is a natural part of being human, it's also a way of looking at it where we can see that there's elements in it that are unsatisfactory. So having experiences that we don't want, aggravating feelings, difficult mind states, being around people who are not easy, and then being separated from things that we love, losing an animal, a friend, a relationship, a loved one. Or, you know, we can have a good meditation, and then once again, we can be dealing with lack of self-esteem. We can lose confidence. We can lose the sense of, you know, knowing what's possible or what our capacity is. So not being able to get rid of what we don't want, not wanting certain body sensations, mind states, situations. So when we look at dukkha, it's not only something that we experience personally, but it's a natural part of life. It's like not only are we in direct contact with our own dukkha, but we're witnessing the dukkha of our friends and our family. we're witnessing the dukkha of the world at large. And so this pervasiveness of suffering is not meant to be a sentence. It's meant to be an opportunity to help us understand the kind of basic thing that we're dealing with so that we can look at what the solution is. And the solution that the Buddha offered is that there is a way out of dukkha. So he did not say that dukkha was the only truth. He says that it was something that we needed to understand in order to understand the way out. So I want to pause for a moment and share something that I find very poignant. It's called My Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. It's by Portia Nelson. In the first chapter, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in and I'm lost. I'm helpless. It's not my fault. And it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It is a habit. My eyes are open. I know exactly where I am. It is my fault, and I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. So this is a kind of, I like it because it speaks to me. You know, how many of us can relate to the kinds of things where we do it again and again and again and again and again, and yet eventually we start to recognize the choices that we've made to get us there. And that ability to see the choices that we've made helps us get out. So we understand dukkha, we study dukkha to understand it, not because it's the only truth or the most important truth, but because it is one of several truths. As we understand how pervasive it is, we see it for what it really is. And as we see it that way, it can help us stop trying to evade it, deny it, repress it, put affirmations on top of it to sugarcoat it. We're just asked to understand it. And so as we move into being able to grok the extent of it, then it shifts us to the second noble truth. And what is the second noble truth? The cause of dukkha, craving for sense experiences through seeing or tasting or smelling or hearing. So every one of us needs to eat, but when we obsess around food or just having the right kinds of tastes, we can recognize the grasping in that, the dukkha in that. Sexuality is part of having a body. And most of us were conceived through sex. That's how we got here. And maybe what I say isn't relevant to you, but you know, for many, sex is a really big and a very strong drive. It influences who we spend time with, what we wear, what we say, the activities that we get involved with. For many, the energy around sex is compelling. Certainly, it's not the only expression of sensual desire, but it's a compelling one. Other ways that we can experience sensual desire is wanting it warmer or cooler, wanting the music louder or softer, wanting the smell sweeter or more pungent, you know, craving ice cream, wanting burritos, wanting the furniture a little bit more Scandinavian, or the vacation a little bit more tropical, or the car a little newer. They can all kind of be part of this craving for sensuality. Craving for becoming, wanting to be someone, wanting to be important. When we have certain characteristics and identities and we are solidified around them and the roles that we have. So I remember when I was at the monastery, we all had chores. And one person's chore was to clean the bathroom. And, you know, in the monastery life is kind of designed to be simple. And many ordinary household pleasures are not of household life are not available. Even simple things like eating when you want to eat. You know, we were only allowed to eat before midday. And so when you strip away ordinary sensual pleasures, then the hunger to assert oneself in being somebody can emerge really strongly. So one female guest had been staying with us for a while, and her morning chore was to clean the bathrooms. And she came to me kind of horrified, because what she noticed was she became completely possessive about the toilets and opinionated about how everybody should use them and what was the best way of cleaning them, and very distressed if somebody left them in a way that was different than the way that she thought that they should leave them. And so, you know, she was talking about that, and she was able to reflect on this and say, you know, I'm the toilet cleaner, like I am. And so normally we don't get all puffed up about cleaning toilets, but that's one of the things about living in a simple environment for extended periods of time is it shows the habits of identification that are not always obvious when there's so many different things that are going on. So the craving to be somebody, in this case, it was the craving to be a toilet cleaner. But we can also have the craving not to be. We can not want to feel pain, not want to feel the pain in our bodies or our hearts, or we can not want things to be scary. We can not want things to be sad, not want things to be uncertain. So there's subtle levels and not so subtle levels to this not wanting. And, you know, I remember for years and years and years, you know, I wished I could like just sit in front of a television and watch football and stuff myself with popcorn and drink beer and like not want to wake up, you know? It seemed like the imagination is that life of like a much more superficial existence would be somehow simpler. I don't think it is, but that was the fantasy. When somebody commits suicide, that's not so subtle aspect of not wanting to be. It's much more direct and much more catastrophic. So the first of the truths is that there's a dukkha, suffering. The second is that there's a cause of dukkha, the desire for becoming and the desire for non-becoming. The third noble truth is that there's a cessation of dukkha. And this is really important because right often where we experience the arising of dukkha is where we can recognize and realize the end of dukkha. So when we've got pain in our shoulders, when we turn our attention towards the pain and we see the not wanting, right at the not wanting, we can soften around it. And as we soften around it without pressure, without demand, without experience or pressure for the thing to shift itself, we can sometimes watch the not wanting or the wanting to release. And as it releases, there's a sense of freedom from suffering. There's an ease. And the ease doesn't mean that the pain has gone away. The ease means that the wanting or the not wanting has gone away. So Garchen Rinpoche is a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and he was interred in a prison of war camp when the Chinese people invaded Tibet. And he describes the situation and the sense of just the rage he was in. And while he was there, there was a lama who also was interned in the same prison of war camp, and showed him the nature of consciousness. And what he was able to convey was, even in this worst case scenario in a prison of war camp, he was able to maintain perspective and compassion rather than hatred for his captors, because he was able to see that this nature of consciousness was something that was in everyone. And so hopefully we don't have to go through such intense experiences in order for our minds to open to those kinds of freedom. But even with less extreme examples of suffering, learning how to focus our attention, learning how to recognize how we are reacting to what's going on, understand it, deal with it, rather than focusing always on changing the external situation itself. This whole teaching on the cessation of suffering is like handing you each golden keys to get out of a prison. It's really powerful if you take these teachings to heart. So to recap, dukkha, or suffering or unsatisfactoriness, is to be understood. The cause of dukkha is to be abandoned. The cessation of dukkha is to be realized. So when we look at this from a trauma-informed perspective, it's really important to keep a couple things in mind. The Buddha was talking about ordinary suffering. He wasn't talking about the kinds of suffering that's present in trauma. And so, as we've been discussing, trauma is not the story of something that happened back then, but the current imprint of that pain, horror, and fear living inside the individual. These leave us stuck in a state of helplessness and terror, and results in a change in how we perceive danger. So the classical teachings around the Second Noble Truth says that the real suffering isn't the pain, the aging, the death, or that things we love change. It's our desire for the pain, the impact of aging, and the reality of death, the reality that what we love changes for it to be otherwise. And so the third noble truth asks us to turn towards our desire for it to be otherwise, to actually embrace the resistance, because that resistance can release. And we can sometimes experience that even though the unpleasant sense contact or situation remains, we can find some measure of peace. Yet the reality is that when we are in a trauma response, when we're in a fight, flight, or freeze response, it's not possible to turn towards the resistance because our nervous systems are jammed. It's also important to recognize that it's possibly and potentially harmful to suggest turning towards the resistance is all that's needed, because usually what's needed is safety. We need to have some measure of safety first. We need to have our nervous systems unjammed second. And then there's the possibility to look at these teachings and to find a way to use them to find peace. So at the time of the Buddha, there was a woman by the name of Patachara, and she was born into wealthy family, merchants, and she eloped with her lover. And she had a child, and at the birth of her second child, there were a whole bunch of very tragic things that happened. She lost her husband. She lost her two children, including her newborn baby. And the next day, she lost both of her parents. And when the Buddha found her, she was so overwhelmed with grief. I mean, can you imagine? I find it hard to imagine. She was screaming, running naked down the street. So we don't know what the Buddha did, and we don't know what he said. All we know is that in the Buddha's presence, she stopped screaming and she put on clothes. So my reading into this, my interpretation of this, is that not only did she stop screaming and put on clothes, which is kind of like a sign that she was tracking social norms and what she was doing in the middle of them, but that she had come out of a trauma response. She was calmed in the presence of the Buddha. But it's important to understand that that was essential before she could consider the teachings. And that's not described. It's not described what she did or what he did. And that whole trauma response is not described. But once she had come out of the trauma response, she was able to contemplate that nothing lasts. And that contemplation brought her tremendous peace. So when we look at the difference between the mindfulness movement and the traditional Buddhist teachings, in the mindfulness movement, mindfulness is emphasized. And in the traditional teachings, the Eightfold Noble Path is emphasized. Mindfulness is one of the factors, but not the main factor. All of those factors come together. And while traditional Buddhist approaches often take on cultural elements, I notice the presence of patriarchy, and that had a definite negative consequences. There's also a way that lifting mindfulness out of the Eightfold Noble Path has negative consequences, where it doesn't fill in the whole picture. So the Four Noble Truths is a fractal teaching, because the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is that there is dukkha. The second is that there is the cause of dukkha. The third is that there's the cessation of dukkha. And the fourth is that there's a path that leads to the cessation of dukkha. And that path includes the Eightfold Noble Path and includes the whole teachings on the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. So the Four Foundations of Mindfulness is a teaching, and within it is the Four Noble Truths, and within the Four Noble Truths is the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. So it's like the nested dolls. Just pausing for a moment, thinking, where is a good place to go with you now? Let me go to Lumpur Dun. Lumpur Dun was a forest meditation monk, and he was known for saying things incredibly simply. So he took the whole complex teaching of the Four Noble Truths and he distilled it into these statements. The mind sent outside is the origin of suffering. The result of the mind sent outside is suffering. The mind seeing the mind is the path, and the result of the mind seeing the mind is the cessation of suffering. Shall I read that again? Yeah. The mind sent outside is the origination of suffering. The result, the mind sent outside, is suffering. The mind seeing the mind is the path, and the result of the mind seeing the mind is the cessation of suffering. So what I want to just talk about now is that in a trauma-informed way of working with the Satipatthana, one of the things that we need to really be able to check is where we are in a realistic way. And so if we are dealing with overwhelm, if we're in a trauma activation, if we're out of our window of tolerance, we can't put these teachings into practice. We have to come back into our window of tolerance first. So the first thing that we need to be able to recognize is whether we are in or outside of our window of tolerance. If we are in our window of tolerance, meaning that what we are dealing with, the thoughts, the feelings, the body sensations, are not more than we are able to cope with, then we can bring these teachings and let them inform how we focus our attention. And we can learn to use the Four Noble Truths as a meditation practice, bringing forward the qualities of the 7 factors of awakening so that we can support our attention focusing in ways that bring about the mind opening and our whole system settling into more and more clarity about what's happening and more capacity to be with what's happening. So let me pause here, open up for some questions, and then I'd like to end with a guided meditation on the Four Noble Truths. Comments, impact, questions? Yes, please, Linda.
In Buddhism, are there teachers who can sit with a student and discern where the student is and what the student needs to focus on next through their own intuition? And if so, are they matching the student's place of consciousness when they meditate together?
So a question like that is a kind of abstract question because there's lots of teachers and lots of ways that they work. And so I think that there are teachers who work like that.
Well, like you just taught, you got to know where you are to figure out where you're going. And sometimes we can't see I can't see myself accurately, and another can see me more accurately. But
so the challenge with that is that is correct, and it's changing now, but it has been in the past that you can have incredibly wise teachers who were not trauma informed. So they didn't actually have a way of assessing whether you were in or outside of your window of tolerance. And so they were giving you classical meditation instructions without being able to assess whether you were in or outside of your window of tolerance. And it was having variable results. predictably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that your complete answer?
So finding a good teacher and having somebody who actually understands where you're at is one of the things that's an incredible gift in this world, and it's not easy. You know, to have somebody who knows you, who senses you, who accurately reads you and advises you in a way that is skillful is an extraordinary blessing. And it can take a long time to find somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Amma. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, this is A. I was interested that you brought up, I grew up in Burma, so I was interested that you brought up the traditional teaching of the Eightfold Path and the mindfulness coming out of it. I think I've been kind of struggling with that because I kind of grew up in this traditional teaching and then kind of moved to mindfulness. And now I don't know how to reconcile those two. But I don't know if you can comment more on that because you also mentioned patriarchy. So I had a real difficulty actually becoming a Buddhist because of that patriarchy part. But then I kind of learned from my mom, who has now passed away, from mindfulness teaching that I would just that I kind of learn more of the teachings of the Buddha per se and the mindfulness and kind of take away all the cultural parts of it, which I didn't like. Like, for example, we have many pagodas in Burma and to, you know, like if it's a higher level, like women are not allowed to go up. And I always questioned that when I was, since I was a kid, and I was like, why is that, you know? So, I mean, those kind of silly things, but that's one thing. But in my practice earlier on, I think Linda also brought this up. When I try to meditate, I feel like because of all the busyness and the demands of my life, when I actually sit down, I just want to kind of immediately want that feeling of like that um, joy. And I kind of reach for that. I just kind of want to look for that and stay there. So how do I work on that?
so there's on one hand, it's a very natural thing to want to have joy and to stay there. And on another hand, it's nuanced because if the wanting is coming from craving, it's going to be counterproductive. If the wanting is coming from aspiration, the aspiration will help you focus in a way that will support increasing the joy being there. That's nuanced to see the difference between wanting from aspiration and wanting from craving. So, for example, right now, can you notice the desire for joy? Can you sense it? How do you sense it?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I guess I just feel like I'm always overwhelmed, so I just want to feel a moment of calm to feel that joy. I don't know. I can't really explain it.
So, if you're feeling overwhelmed and that's a common experience, it's a really skillful thing to want to move towards feeling joy because joy is a balance towards feeling overwhelmed. Okay. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed, what's necessary is to have tools that help you feel less overwhelmed. That's absolutely true. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's you kind of need to go in whatever is available to you, you know? So whatever helps you feel a little bit more settled, a little bit more calm, a little bit more collected, move in those directions. So what helps you feel less overwhelmed?
Just kind of, I don't know, just finding time for myself and slowing down, and very simple things like just, I I've made a routine to just say my prayers in the morning, and offer water and fruit to the Buddha statue I have, which is kind of like a traditional practice that I grew up with. So that's kind of like my daily moment to just gather myself. And then when I'm off on the weekends, I try a little more time to meditate.
So what I have done is develop different things that help me in different kinds of situations. So for example, when I left England and I was living in Colorado, I was near the Garden of the Gods, which is a beautiful natural rock formation. And I found the rocks very settling. So I would go and I would meditate on the rocks, and the rocks would be fabulous because no matter what kind of mind state I was in, after some period of time, sometimes it was 10 minutes, sometimes it was an hour, I would always feel better. So the rocks became a really powerful association for me as a tool for helping me to come back into a place of settledness. But I couldn't be on those big rocks all the time. So I would walk around with small rocks in my pocket. And so what's helpful is to think about, like, so maybe a little mala that can help remind you of your offering in the morning time, so that during the day you can have a touch with the mala when you're feeling a little bit out of sorts or a little bit overwhelmed. Or instead of having a whole ritual, you can maybe take 4 breaths where you put your hands on your heart and you really exhale and focus on the exhale. Or there can be other things that you can do during the day that help you feel more settled. And so when you're feeling more settled, then in that feeling of more settled, then you'll be able to make more use of the teachings. But until you're feeling more settled, really the first thing that you need to do is figure out, what can you do to help feel a little bit more settled? That's the first thing. And whether it's chanting or offering or touching the mala or doing recitation of the different qualities of the Buddha, whatever it is that helps you, it is fine. Just like start developing like a toolkit where you've got all these different things, because the number one thing that you'll forget when you're feeling overwhelmed is everything that's in your toolkit. Like that's kind of guaranteed that you'll forget the things that help as soon as you start feeling overwhelmed. So it's kind of like you need to develop like a muscle memory, because you're not going to remember with your brain. That's why when I had the stones in my pocket, it was really helpful, because I could just reach into my pocket and feel them, and the association with them would help me to remember what it was like being on the big rocks. Now, the other question about separating mindfulness from the traditional teachings and unraveling patriarchy and trying to figure out what is what is a bigger story. And, I was a monastic for 28 years, including the 2 years I was a postulant. I've been meditating for just shy of 50 years now. I've been in both the secular mindfulness movement and the traditional teachings. And part of the story for me has been to understand the trauma impact that I had from some of the negative patriarchal things that happened. And as I've been able to understand the trauma impact and release that, then I have more clarity about what makes sense in terms of what's the right way for me to relate to the teachings. What's the teachings that resonate with me? What are the things that don't make sense to me? What's the cultural stuff? And what's patriarchy and misogyny that's been passed down for generations because people just simply haven't cleared it out? For me, the difference has been as I've cleared the trauma imprints from some of the unfortunate things that I lived through out of my system, I have more clarity about how to respond to these other questions.
I wish I could do more with you. So maybe in the future, I'd like to know also, because I'm also working on that to try to like sort things out. And yeah.
So, first of all, I would like to recommend that it's not silly to think that the fact that you weren't able to go to the stupas is something that's just a trivial thing. Because when our hunger to pray or to worship or to honor or to be able to give our devotion fully is blocked because of a characteristic of our identity that we have no control over, like our gender, it's not a small thing. It's actually a very hurtful thing. And then when you're told it actually is a small thing and it doesn't matter, because what we want to do is to transcend all of these worldly conditions, because where we're going is ultimately a lot freeing. That's kind of crazy making, because what people are saying is that the pain that I'm experiencing doesn't have any validity, because you're telling me that where I'm supposed to be going is going to relinquish all of this. And that's a particular kind of crazy making that is really hard to feel clear about. And so it's easy to get, for that to take a long time to clarify. I want to just pause for a moment and talk a little bit about the integrated meditation program, because it may be relevant. And then I want to shift gears and then go into a guided meditation. Yes.
Okay.
Tia?
Thank you.
We do have one more question in the chat, so I want to make sure that that has a moment, but do your thing first, I think, and then that.
Okay. So the integrated meditation program is something that I created because of recognizing that the classical meditation and even the mindfulness meditation doesn't give us tools to deal with the kinds of strategies that were put in place as a result of the presence and the absence of certain conditions in our formative years. And so when we bring certain conditions, then it helps us with the neuroplasticity of our brains and changing those patterns so that they are, we have access to different ways of thinking about ourselves and the world. And so when we have these layers of things going on, both things that happened in our formative years, things in the culture that are constantly telling us that our basic experiences don't have any validity, patriarchy that's passed down through generations and traditions, we can have adaptive strategies to respond to them that has us feeling anxious and uncomfortable, both in ourselves and about the world. So the integrated meditation program is set up to help support changing those fundamental beliefs. And on Wednesdays, I have a drop-in group if people want to ask more questions about it or curious more or want to find out how it works or any of those things. That's for free. People can just come and show up. Just register on the website. And I've given Tia the links to put in for the drop-in experience, which I believe she already has. So if there's a sense that that may be a support, I strongly encourage you to come. Because what happens is that these things get layered, and it's hard to figure out how do you deal with the layers because it's all compacted. And so what that program does is it starts at kind of a root layer, helps get some basic things well established. And my experience is that when those root things start to shift, it helps clarify all the other layers. Let me see what this other question is.
Can you see it from Vivian?
Yes. If
Okay.
I am in a role of offering guidance to other practitioners, what markers can I look for to help determine if they are in their window of tolerance? If somebody's in their window of tolerance, you will notice that they well, if they're out of their window of tolerance, you'll notice a certain level of restlessness. You can see a certain amount of distractibility. You can see that they're feeling it's hard for them to sit still. You might see physical signs like sweating or signs of anxiety. If they're numb or they're frozen, they can look calm, but there's a kind of vacuousness to them, like they don't have any substance. They're just like an empty sheet, like a pencil drawing with no life force in them. Are there other questions or comments or impact? Yes, Angela.
Comments. I have a bit of a cold and my voice is really bad. I think most of your stories have had a lot of impact. I particularly like your examples of cooking because I spend a lot of time cooking. And yesterday I was making bread and I was thinking I have to make bread because I'm alive to feed myself. And I thought, where did that thought come from? Like, why am I connecting bread with being alive or not being alive? So thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Well, this was very helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad, Linda. I'm glad. So what I'd like to do for the next bit is to shift gears and offer a guided meditation and see if we can work with the Four Noble Truths. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is to find a posture that feels comfortable and to just take a moment, and maybe we can just start with some just gentle rocking. So finding your posture and your spine upright, and then locating the top of your hips and just rotating, rocking over your hips, sitting bones, just slightly forward and backwards. And you can notice on the forward that there's a place where you need to kind of pull back with your stomach muscles, otherwise you're going to fall forward. And then there's a place when you lean back where you have to pull forward so that you don't lean back, fall back. And so just notice the rocking and notice how the rocking impacts you, how it helps you to feel grounded and settled. And so this rocking can become very subtle, so that there's just a tiny little bit of movement forwards and backwards. And sometimes it feels very soothing to have one or two hands on your heart as you're rocking. You can feel the weight and the contact of your hands on your heart. And so we can allow the rocking to continue while we're sitting. This very slight rocking back and forth. We can do this to help us settle, to help us feel at ease and comforted. And to know that when we feel settled and at ease and comforted in this way, it supports us to be able to make use of other meditation instructions that we have. So the first thing we want to check is, are we inside or outside of our window of tolerance? If we're inside of our window of tolerance, it means that we can feel some or much of our body, that what we're feeling doesn't feel overwhelming. And if we're feeling overwhelmed, then we can continue with rocking, or we can hum, or we can tap, or we can orient outward, look at vertical lines, or some of the other practices that we've done, until we feel settled enough, steady enough, able enough to be with what's happening without it feeling like it's too much. So the first question is, are we inside or outside of our window of tolerance? And if you're still feeling out of your window of tolerance, then I would invite you to maybe stand up or to walk slowly in the back of your room. And really trust. Coming into the window of tolerance is important. And so I'm going to move forward, assuming that we're in our window of tolerance. And if we're not, if you're not, then just lightly listen to what I'm saying and mostly focus on doing practices that will help you settle. And so we need a certain amount of collectedness. And sometimes it is supported with the breath. Just allowing the breath to come and to go, to feel the in-breath, to experience the release and the relaxation of the out-breath. And as you notice, there's some collection of attention, more settling, and see if it feels comfortable to keep your hands on your chest, on your heart, or to let them fall into your lap or into another place. And notice and remember that if any point you're feeling overwhelmed or like it's too much, trust that. Take care of yourself. Do what is helpful to settle, to feel resourced and connected. If you need to walk, then it's helpful to turn the video off so that there's less movement for those of us who are not walking. So really trust yourself and your own sense of where you're at. and what is needed next. So if there's enough settledness, just check and see what's present now in your body. Can you feel parts of your body, or parts of your body numb or don't have any sensation? And the parts that you can feel, what are the feeling tones that you notice? Bringing an open, non-judgmental, curious attention. And as you're with those feelings, if it's a pleasant feeling, do you notice any hunger for it to stay or to increase? And what happens if you gently embrace that wanting? Just wrap it with awareness, with attention, with curiosity. Sometimes in our bodies, we find places that are tight or tense, painful. And we can be curious about the different ways that we experience the unpleasantness, and if it changes, how it changes, and what shape it occupies. We can also check and see if we're experiencing something unpleasant, if there's a resistance, not wanting it to go away, to change, to become smaller, to disappear. And so when we see that or notice that, we can lovingly, gently envelop that reaction. And notice what we notice when we do. Sometimes the reaction shifts. It gets bigger, it gets smaller, it stays the same. Sometimes the reaction dissolves. And when the reaction dissolves, we can come back to the breath. Gathering attention, sustaining attention, breathing in and breathing out. And so in this way, we can use the breath as an anchor and move to experience that arises. Notice the feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, our reaction to it. Embrace the reaction. Watch what happens. And as it shifts, as it dissolves, come back to the breath, the anchor. Bringing the qualities of mindfulness and effort, concentration, collecting and allowing, settling. Factors that support us to continue to be present with what's happening. So I am within my window of tolerance, and I check and see, am I experiencing any stress? Is it physical stress? Is it emotional stress? Is it mental stress? And I gently and lovingly bring my attention to the stress. And check and see, is there something that I'm wanting to be different? Wanting it not to be there. And then gently and lovingly embrace that wanting or not wanting. Just watching what happens. As and when wanting or not wanting starts to dissipate and dissolve, we can be present with the cessation. Return to the anchor. Stay there for a while. And then ask again. Is there some place in my body, heart, or mind where I feel stress right now? Tightness, contraction, unsatisfactoriness. Move towards it. Be curious about it. Embrace it. And embrace the reaction. And watch what happens. And when things dissolve, you can either stay with the stillness, quiet, saturate in the stillness and the quiet, and the awareness that knows the stillness and quiet. And if that isn't available or easeful, return to the breath. So I'd like to invite you to put in the chat your impact of this meditation. Calm and refreshed, deep relaxation, joy, calming, and a good reminder that I can head back into my window of tolerance. Lovely. So we're coming to the end of our series. Much more aware of my body aches and pains than thoughts, than quiet, than more spaciousness. And so I'd like to invite, what you're leaving this series with, what you're leaving the end of this day with, what you're leaving this series with. What are you taking forward? Yes.
More awareness of Buddhist terms and principles and practices and ways of viewing meditation in the world. Are we supposed to be writing this in the chat?
You can write or you can speak. Either's fine.
And also, thank you for helping with personal questions. And I really appreciated that a lot. I'm glad we were a small group. And this was very nice. I feel like I'm really glad I could be here.
Thank you for sharing. So we have a couple more reminders that the classical teachings can be relevant to my modern experience in a broader way than I usually manage. A path to work on my progressing in my practice. Lovely.